Flags in federal buildings have been lowered to half-staff to honor the loss of South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham, who died suddenly this weekend at 71. He sat at the table here several times over the years, and he leaves behind a complicated legacy. So some of you knew him, some of you knew him well. What do you remember?
Well, I knew him very well. He was a friend of mine for many years, frankly, through John McCain, who was his best friend and his mentor for many years. First thing I want to say is I saw a lot of posts online this week kind of celebrating his death and rejoicing. And listen, I know that Trump does that. He did it with Bob Mueller. He did it with John McCain.
He did it with Rob Reiner.
He did it with Rob Reiner. But it's inhumane, and it's really lacking empathy. And the dead person's dead and can't hear you and can't read your post. But his family, his sister, who he adopted when she was 13 because both their parents died, is alive and is hearing it. And so I think that for the benefit, for humanity, for having, you know, a normal decency towards the family of the dead, that just has to stop. The fact that Donald Trump is indecent doesn't mean the rest of us have to do it. But as to Lindsey, look, for me, there was a Lindsey before Trump and a Lindsey after Trump. There were, you know, two completely different Lindseys. And this brought out all sorts of feelings in me because, honestly, I felt like I had buried Lindsey when John McCain died because he became just a completely different person. And I get it. I get it that people are brokenhearted. I'm brokenhearted. I get it that people were disappointed in him. I'm disappointed in him. I think Lindsey, you know, for Lindsey, the Senate, his position was his life. He really felt that making a difference was everything for him, and he was going to do anything that it took for him to continue getting elected and having influence. And that took sucking up to Trump, and it meant that he did keep getting reelected and that he did have influence on issues that he cared enormously about, like foreign policy. He was a staunch, unwavering supporter of Ukraine, of Israel, on freedom in the Western Hemisphere in places like Cuba, like Venezuela, like Nicaragua. He was also so freaking funny. He was, I mean, I know it's a low bar, but he is the funniest politician I have ever met. He was a son of the South, proud of being that proud of his service in the military. I think his legacy is complicated. I think Lindsey was marked by having lost both his parents very early in his life. He then adopted his sister, who was 13, so that she could get his military benefits. And I think that's why he needed this kind of like big brother, mentor, kind of like father figure. McCain at first, and then Trump.
I'm today just thinking of his family and his staff. I worked on Capitol Hill and have dear friends who worked for him for many years, and some of his staff have been with him for nearly 20 years. And those offices become like a family, and so I'm thinking of them. They're in my prayers, and I think it was shocking. No one saw this coming. I got a call from CNN at 4:30 in the morning when the news broke, and my husband said Lindsey Graham passed, and I expected he'd be in public life for another decade. He was seeking re-election. 71 by Senate standards is actually fairly young. But I'll say this, in honoring his legacy today, one thing that every woman at this table agrees with is that Ukraine should be supported in its efforts and its fight against Russia's unlawful and illegal invasion and war there. And he was a staunch supporter of Ukraine. One of his final acts that he was working on was to do crippling sanctions against Russia. It's a bipartisan bill supported by Senator Shaheen. I hope that that's something that the Senate, to honor his legacy, passes and that this president signs into law. I also think that he did have a unique area of influence on foreign policy with Donald Trump. So last week, we kind of got caught up in the news, but Donald Trump announced that he was going to allow Ukraine to have Patriot missile defense systems. This is a huge concession by Trump. He has not supported this in the past, and I believe Senator Graham was instrumental in getting him to approve this, because Trump has waffled on Ukraine, but Lindsey Graham never did. So I want to honor that aspect of his legacy, and I do hope that that Russia sanctions bill passes the Senate.
I mean, I didn't know him well. He had been on this show several times. I remember speaking to Meghan McCain about him quite a bit, because she was very close to him and was very disappointed in the change that she saw after John McCain died. But I think, you know, he was certainly this political chameleon, and his legacy is complicated, and people are speaking out about the very hypocrisy that you saw when he was John McCain's friend and when he became friends with Donald Trump. Steve Schmidt, who's a political strategist and worked on the John McCain campaign in 2008, wrote just today, Lindsey knew better. And he said he was a lonely and unprincipled man who betrayed his country for power and his decency for attention. That is someone that knew him. He also called him a pilot fish, a smaller fish that hovers about a larger predator like a shark, living off of its deleterious, and that's Lindsey. And if you look at his own words, Lindsey's own words, in 2015, he calls Trump a race-baiting, xenophobic, religious bigot. In 2016, he said, if we nominate Trump, we will get destroyed and we will deserve it. But then, in January 6, 2026, he calls him the greatest president of all time. And then May 27, 2026, he said they should change the Nobel Prize to the Trump Prize. And then finally, on June 9th, 2026, he says, Mr. President, you're not far behind God. And so I think when you're talking about...
he's going to have to explain it to God now.
Yeah. When you're talking about a complicated legacy and someone who may have betrayed his country for power, that seems to be, in my view, what his legacy became.
So I'm going to echo Anna's sentiments that today the people that have passed aren't going to read the comments or hear it, and that the families that survived them and the friends and the people that worked for them remain here to hear what we say. And so I'm more of the thought that he is no longer at play. I did not know him at all. I didn't know really much about him, but it did disturb me that people were online saying things like, don't humanize him. You don't have to humanize a human. He was a human. And so there were people that loved him. There were people that cared for him. And whether I disagreed with him completely or not, he's gone. And so my heart goes out to the people around him that are suffering. Some people posted some really cool posts, things I didn't know. Cory Booker posted about how he was his most unexpected friend in Congress, and they had worked on a bill together. And I think that's the way—
The first step back.
Yeah, the first step back. I think that's how you honor someone. They're gone. They're no longer here. And he was saying, I just wanted to share this story. I think that's the way a lot of people seek closure on the loss of someone. This was a colleague to many. And so my heart goes to the family, the people that are going to have to suffer now. And so I'll just...
Well, I think he had a lot of bipartisan friendships.
Yes.
Because, number one, he was an effective senator.
Yeah.
He knew how to deal with in the Senate. Also, Lindsey was a good time. Like when I first met Lindsey, he didn't drink at all. He would like take sips of Bailey's. Then he started drinking Riesling. But he was...
Those are such random drink choices.
I would say to him
coming through the sweet
all
drinks.
the time. I would say to him all the time, you are the most fun person I know sober than anybody I know drunk. Because he was hilarious. And I'll say, look, his relationship with McCain, yeah, McCain was kind of like the Batman and he was the Robin. But it was very mutual. They had incredible mutual love and respect for each other. I'm not going to talk about his relationship with Trump because that I don't understand at all. But with McCain, it was a very real friendship for both of them, is what I observed.
I remember
for
one of my rites of passage on Capitol Hill was getting in an elevator behind he and Senator McCain, and they had actually just briefed the members of Congress that I worked for, and it was talking about sequestration cuts to the Pentagon, nothing super fascinating, but they were trying to get them on board to raise defense spending. And Lindsey Graham gets on right behind McCain, and McCain swears in some colorful language. It was like, why did you have to tell them about the cuts? And they didn't realize I was in the elevator, but it was this hilarious moment, dead silent, and then everyone starts cracking up. But they had a dear friendship. They were two people who believe very strongly in the defense of this nation. If you find other areas you disagree with them, that was something they were both very, very committed
And you know what?
to.
One of the things I was remembering, if I might just tell you this little story.
Sure.
When Obama, McCain runs against Obama. Obama wins. Obama appoints Sonia Sotomayor, the first Latina that was going to be serving in the Supreme Court. And I get called by Latino groups asking that I call McCain and that I call Lindsey to ask for them to vote for Sonia Sotomayor. McCain didn't. he was really pissed off still. Lindsey did support Sonia Sotomayor, and despite all my differences with him, and he was on the Judiciary Committee, so it was important. I thought his vote was incredibly significant, and I appreciated it.
Well, you know, look, all these things that have been said are true.
Yeah.
He was a complicated cat.
Yeah.
And there's no getting around
Yep.
that. And some things, you know, I wish he really had paid more attention. Like, I love that he was all about the Ukraine, but I wish he had stopped this one from trying to put together Project 2025. I wish, do you know what I mean? So none of us is perfect.
Right.
None of us. And so we make good choices, we make weird choices, and they're not always the choices people want us to make the way they want us to make them. And he lived with himself. And him and God will figure out whatever went on.
Yeah.
Okay? But at this point in time, he's gone. God rest your soul. God rest your soul. I don't wish any bad on anybody. Even the ones you know I really should. But I don't. I will be right back.